Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping back, way back, into a silence so profound it has echoed for millennia. Picture this. You're scrolling through satellite images on your fancy tablet, zooming in on the arid plains of modern day Pakistan. You see the usual tans and browns, maybe a smudge of green near a river. But then a pattern emerges. Strange, almost too perfect rectangles. The ghostly outline of streets, buildings, an entire city sleeping under the dust. That's Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead, a jewel of the Indus Valley civilization, a metropolis that once pulsed with life, as advanced in its day as New York or London are in ours, and then it just went quiet. Seriously, these folks had grid-planned streets, sophisticated plumbing, and even public baths nearly 4,500 years ago. You, with your artisanal sourdough starter and your smart fridge, you probably wouldn't have survived the sheer organizational prowess, let alone the sudden, mysterious end. It's a historical vanishing act that makes Houdini look like an amateur. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's always fascinating to see where everyone's tuning in from as we drift off into the past. Now, turn down your lights, maybe get a fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You're walking not on dusty satellite images, but on sun-baked earth. The air is thick, carrying the scent of wood smoke, roasting grains, and something else. A faint metallic tang you can't quite place, perhaps from a nearby coppersmith's workshop. It's hot, the kind of heat that makes the horizon shimmer, but there's a surprising order to the world around you. You're in a wide, straight street, paved with bricks that fit together with an almost unnerving precision. These aren't just any old mud bricks. These are standardized, kiln-fired, a testament to an organized mind, or many organized minds, working in concert. You look up. The buildings lining the street are mostly 2 stories high, their flat roofs hinting at cool evenings spent stargazing, away from the residual heat of the day. No grand palaces dominate the skyline, no towering ziggurats demanding your worship. It's egalitarian almost. Prosperous, certainly, but not ostentatious. You glance to your right and see an open doorway. Curiosity, that timeless human itch, pulls you closer. Peeking inside, you see a courtyard, and beyond it, rooms leading off, cool and shadowed. What really catches your eye, though, is a small brick-lined channel running from the courtyard towards the main street. A drain. And as you look more closely, you realize these channels are everywhere, disappearing into covered conduits running beneath the street. This city, Mohenjo-Daro, in roughly 2500 BCE, has a sanitation system that many parts of the world wouldn't see for another 4,000 years. Think about that. While much of Europe was still figuring out how not to live directly on top of its own refuse, the people here had it sorted. You almost want to chuckle imagining a Roman engineer time traveling here and just taking furious notes, muttering about aqueducts being a tad overrated when you have this level of civic planning. You continue your stroll, marveling at the uniformity. The bricks, as we mentioned, are mostly of a consistent size and quality. Historians still debate whether this points to a strong central authority dictating standards from on high, like some ancient building inspector with a very specific set of rules, or if it was more of a shared cultural understanding, a guild-based system where craftsmen simply knew the right way to do things. It's one of those delicious little arguments that keeps academics in tweed jackets and comfy cardigans gainfully employed. The lack of massive royal tombs or overwhelming temples dedicated to a single all powerful ruler also fuels this debate. Was it a kingdom? An oligarchic republic of merchants? A collective of city states? The script, those enigmatic symbols found on thousands of small seals, remains undeciphered, holding its secrets tight. If only we could read what they wrote, perhaps we'd know if they argued about tax rates or complained about the municipal water board. You pass by workshops. You can hear the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of a bead maker, painstakingly drilling tiny holes into carnelian stones. These beads, intricate and beautiful, would travel incredible distances, found in Mesopotamia thousands of miles away, a testament to a vast and sophisticated trade network. These weren't just isolated urbanites. They were connected, globalized in their own Bronze Age way. You see potters at their wheels, their hands deftly shaping clay into storage jars, cooking pots, and delicate painted ceramics. The artistry is undeniable, but it's a practical art, functional yet imbued with a quiet beauty. You can almost smell the wet clay, feel the focused energy of creation. It's a hive of industry, but a strangely calm one. No shouting hawkers, no aggressive sales pitches like you might imagine in a bustling ancient market. There's a dignity to the labor. One rather peculiar detail you notice, or rather don't notice much of, is weaponry. Sure, there are copper spearheads and arrowheads, but not in the overwhelming quantities you might find in the archaeological record of other contemporary civilizations known for their warmongering. The city walls, while substantial, don't scream fortress in the same way. It's led some to romantically imagine the Indus Valley civilization as a uniquely peaceful society, a sort of Bronze Age utopia. Of course, that's likely an oversimplification. Peace is a relative term, and a lack of massive armories doesn't mean a lack of conflict. Perhaps their conflicts were just managed differently, or perhaps the evidence simply hasn't been found or has been misinterpreted. It's another one of those enduring mysteries. You can imagine a particularly cynical archaeologist after a long day in the sun muttering, peaceful? Or just really good at hiding their swords? You wander towards what seems to be a more public area. And there it is, the Great Bath. It's an imposing structure, a large rectangular pool, sunk into the ground, lined with meticulously fitted bricks and sealed with bitumen to make it waterproof. Steps lead down into it from either end. Surrounding it are smaller rooms, possibly changing rooms, or even private bathing cubicles. It's clearly a place of importance. But what kind? Was it for ritual purification? A sacred cleansing before religious ceremonies? Or was it simply a public bathhouse, a place for hygiene and social gathering, like a Roman thermae, but centuries earlier? The sheer scale and careful construction suggest it was more than just a big bathtub. Scholars lean towards ritual significance, given its prominence and the careful engineering. You can almost hear the echoes of chatter, the splash of water, the scent of oils or herbs used in bathing rituals. It feels communal, significant. A mainstream historical fact is that Mohenjo-Daro, along with Harappa, its sister city, represents the peak of the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the three earliest cradles of civilization alongside Egypt and Mesopotamia. Yet it's often the least talked about, perhaps because its script is undeciphered, leaving us with a frustratingly incomplete picture. We see their achievements, their cities, their crafts, but we cannot hear their voices directly. We interpret their lives through the silent language of artifacts. You find yourself pausing by a well, one of many public wells that dot the city, providing fresh water to the populace. The engineering is again impressive, perfectly circular, lined with bricks that curve to form the shaft. Some houses even had private wells, and many had what appear to be the world's first known toilets, connected to that sophisticated drainage system. Imagine a toilet in your house in 2500 BCE. It's the kind of ancient innovation that makes you look at your own modern plumbing with a newfound respect, or perhaps a little shame if you've been neglecting that leaky faucet. This focus on water management and sanitation speaks volumes about their understanding of public health, or at least their desire for a clean and orderly environment. As the sun begins to dip lower, casting long shadows down the arrow straight streets, you notice the people. They are depicted in the small carved stone seals you've seen replicas of, tiny masterpieces of art. Men with neatly trimmed beards and robes, women with elaborate hairstyles and jewelry. They seem poised, dignified. There's a famous bronze statuette known as the Dancing Girl, slender and confident, one hand on her hip, adorned with bangles. She's not conventionally beautiful by modern standards, perhaps, but she exudes an undeniable charisma, a sense of self possession that transcends the millennia. These were real people with lives as complex and nuanced as our own, with hopes, fears, and daily routines. It's easy to get lost in the marvel of the city's construction and forget the human element. But they are there, in the wear patterns on the thresholds of houses, in the fingerprints occasionally found on the ancient pottery, in the varied layout of their homes designed for family life. A slightly more out there fringe idea that occasionally gets whispered about in less formal academic circles, or perhaps after a few too many glasses of sherry at a conference, concerns the sheer uniformity of the Indus cities. Some have whimsically suggested an almost hive mind level of conformity, or perhaps a society so deeply ingrained with tradition and order that innovation, after a certain point, became stifled. This isn't a mainstream theory by any stretch and lacks concrete evidence, but it's a curious thought when you consider how little the fundamental layout and material culture changed over centuries. Before, of course, the eventual decline. It's like they perfected their model of urban living and then just stuck with it, maybe a bit too well. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Taken to a civilizational extreme, perhaps? The streets are emptying now as dusk settles. The smell of evening meals being prepared drifts from courtyards. You see oil lamps flickering to life in doorways, casting a warm, inviting glow. There's a sense of peace, of a society functioning smoothly like a well oiled machine. The children who were earlier playing some game with dice or marbles in a side alley have been called in. The day is winding down. It's hard to imagine, standing here in this moment of apparent stability and prosperity, that this entire way of life, this magnificent city, is destined to fade. Not in a blaze of glory, not through a dramatic conquest that leaves layers of ash and destruction for archaeologists to gleefully excavate, but through something quieter, more insidious. The sheer scale of Mohenjo-Daro is impressive. It's estimated to have housed tens of thousands of people. Think about the logistics of feeding that many, of providing water, of disposing of waste, all without the benefit of modern technology. They were master organizers. Yet this intricate system, this well adapted urban marvel, would eventually falter. You look around one last time at the orderly streets, the solid brick houses, the faint outline of the great bath under the emerging stars. There's a solidity here, a sense of permanence that makes its eventual abandonment all the more baffling. It's like finding a perfectly preserved Rolex in the middle of the desert, still ticking, but with no owner in sight and no note explaining why it was left behind. The question hangs in the cooling night air. What could possibly cause such a sophisticated, well established city to simply cease to be? To vanish not with a bang, but with a slow, drawn out whisper, leaving behind these incredible bones for us to puzzle over thousands of years later? The complexity of their society is both awe inspiring and, in the context of its disappearance, deeply unsettling. You feel a slight chill despite the warm air, a premonition of the silence that is to come. The silence that we are here tonight, trying to understand. The lights in the houses are beginning to go out, one by one, as the inhabitants of Mohenjo-Daro prepare for sleep, unaware of the long, quiet night that awaits their civilization. The last oil lamp in the house across the narrow lane has just been extinguished. A deep quiet settles over Mohenjo-Daro, the kind of quiet that allows you to hear the distant bark of a dog or the rustle of a night breeze through unseen trees along the great Indus River. You stand in the shadowed street, the starlight surprisingly bright in a world without electric glow, and you feel the weight of that impending silence we talked about. The city sleeps unaware that its dreams are slowly, inexorably leading to a centuries long oblivion. The why of it all begins to press in, a silent question mark hanging over every perfectly laid brick. How does a place so alive, so organized, just fade? Let's step out of this immersive moment for a bit, into the slightly less dusty halls of modern archaeology, and consider the suspects lined up for the case of the vanishing city. For a long time, the prime suspect, brandished with dramatic flair by archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler back in the mid 20th century, was invasion. Wheeler, a man who knew a thing or two about military matters from his own service, found some skeletons, seemingly haphazardly buried, in the upper layers of Mohenjo-Daro. He dramatically declared them victims of an Aryan invasion, tying it into linguistic theories about the arrival of Indo-Aryan speakers in the subcontinent. You can almost picture him, pith helmet askew, pointing a trowel like a smoking gun. J'accuse. The Rig Veda speaks of Indra, the fort destroyer. Here are your destroyed forts and your slain defenders. It was a neat, tidy, and rather Eurocentric narrative. Vigorous newcomers sweeping away an older, perhaps decadent civilization. It made for a great story, the kind that ends with a bang. But, like many a good story, it started to unravel under closer scrutiny. The massacre skeletons turned out to be few in number, not nearly enough for a citywide slaughter. Many showed signs of burial, however hasty, not just bodies left where they fell in battle. And the timeline didn't quite match up. The city showed signs of decline before the supposed period of these invasions. So, the dramatic invasion theory, while it still pops up in less reputable corners of the internet, you know the type, probably next to blurry photos of UFOs over ancient sites, has been largely discredited by mainstream archaeology. Most scholars now believe that if there was conflict, it was likely opportunistic, preying on an already weakened society, rather than the primary cause of its downfall. It's a bit like blaming the final cough for a long illness. Dramatic, perhaps, but not the whole story. Still, the idea of some conflict, perhaps internal strife or raids by hill tribes, isn't entirely off the table. Historians still debate the nature and extent of violence in the final phases of Indus cities. Were these isolated incidents or symptoms of a broader breakdown in law and order? So, if not a dramatic sack and plunder, what else could empty a metropolis like Mohenjo-Daro? You look up at the sky again, imagining it not clear and starlit, but choked with dust, or perhaps an endless, unyielding blue. The climate. Ah, the climate, that fickle master of human destiny. This theory has gained a lot of traction, and for good reason. The Indus Valley civilization was a hydraulic society, its agriculture utterly dependent on the rhythms of the Indus River and the monsoon rains. But what if those rhythms changed? Evidence from paleoclimatology, studying ancient tree rings, lake sediments, and even microscopic pollen, suggests that the region underwent significant climatic shifts around the time Mohenjo-Daro and other Indus cities began to wane. Imagine the mighty Indus, the lifeblood of this civilization, slowly, almost imperceptibly changing its course. Rivers are dynamic things. They meander, they flood, they carve new paths. If the Indus shifted away from Mohenjo-Daro, the city's intricate water supply and drainage systems, its very agricultural base, would be catastrophically undermined. You can picture the wells running dry, the carefully constructed canals silting up, the fields that once fed thousands turning barren and cracked. Or perhaps it wasn't just the river's course, but the monsoons themselves. What if they became erratic? Too much rain, leading to devastating floods that overwhelmed the city's defenses and damaged infrastructure. There is indeed evidence of multiple flood events in Mohenjo-Daro's history. Or perhaps more devastatingly in the long run, too little rain. A prolonged drought, lasting decades or even centuries, would have choked the life out of the agricultural heartland. The granaries, those impressive structures that stored the city's surplus, would empty. The bustling marketplaces would fall silent as there was less and less to trade. It's a slow, creeping death, not as cinematic as an invasion, but far more relentless. You can almost feel the growing desperation, the prayers for rain that go unanswered, the slow tightening of hunger's grip. It's a truly sobering thought. A civilization so advanced, brought to its knees by shifts in the weather patterns we now know are so profoundly powerful. It kind of makes you think twice about forgetting your reusable shopping bags, doesn't it? A little Bronze Age perspective on our own climate anxieties. Then there's the theory of internal decline, a sort of societal implosion. This is a more complex, multifaceted idea. Perhaps the very success of the Indus civilization led to overpopulation, straining resources beyond their limit. Deforestation as timber was felled for construction and for firing those millions upon millions of standardized bricks could have led to soil erosion and further exacerbated the effects of floods and droughts. You might imagine the meticulously planned city slowly becoming overcrowded, the sanitation systems, once so efficient, struggling to cope. Maybe trade routes? Those vital arteries that brought in raw materials like lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and carnelian from Gujarat, and exported finished goods were disrupted. If those connections frayed, whether due to conflict elsewhere or shifting political landscapes, or even environmental changes affecting travel, the economic heart of cities like Mohenjo-Daro would suffer. A mainstream historical fact supporting this interconnectedness is the discovery of Indus seals and beads in Mesopotamian cities like Ur and Mesopotamian cylinder seals in Indus sites. This isn't just a casual exchange. It points to well established, long distance trade relationships that lasted for centuries. The prosperity of the Indus cities was deeply tied to this international commerce. If that engine stalled, the ripple effects would have been immense. The merchants would lose their fortunes, the craftspeople their markets, and the entire urban edifice built on surplus and trade would begin to crumble. Historians often point to a decline in the quality of construction in the later phases of Mohenjo-Daro. Houses become smaller, built with reused or shoddier bricks, sometimes encroaching on public streets. It's as if the civic pride, the meticulous planning of earlier centuries, was giving way to a more haphazard, desperate kind of existence. The Mound of the Dead isn't just a name. The city literally rose on its own accumulated debris over centuries. And in its later stages, perhaps it was also rising on the debris of its fading glory. Let's consider a slightly more unusual or perhaps under-discussed factor: disease. In a densely populated city, even one with advanced sanitation for its time, an epidemic could be devastating. We have little direct evidence of what diseases might have plagued the Harappans, as organic remains don't preserve well over 4 millennia. But think about it. Large numbers of people living in close proximity, reliance on communal water sources, and interaction through trade with distant lands. These are all classic ingredients for the spread of infectious diseases. If a new pathogen emerged, or if an existing one became more virulent, it could have swept through the population, weakening it, reducing the workforce, and causing a breakdown in social order. It's a grim thought. People succumbing to an unseen enemy, their sophisticated drainage systems perhaps not enough to protect them from microscopic invaders. While there's no smoking gun for a specific plague, it's a plausible contributing factor, especially when combined with other stressors like famine or environmental hardship. It's the kind of quiet killer that leaves few dramatic traces for archaeologists, just a gradual emptying of homes and streets. You can almost imagine a worried healer grinding herbs with a stone pestle, feeling utterly helpless against an illness they couldn't understand, much like healers in many eras before the advent of germ theory. One rather fringe detail, or perhaps a misunderstood one, comes from those same skeletons that Wheeler initially used for his invasion theory. Some of these bones, when re-examined decades later with more advanced forensic techniques, did show signs of trauma, but also conditions like anemia or leprosy. This doesn't necessarily mean a citywide epidemic of leprosy, but it does hint at a population under significant stress, perhaps suffering from malnutrition or chronic diseases that made them more vulnerable. The debate among paleopathologists is ongoing. Were these isolated cases or indicative of broader health challenges in the declining city? It's a stark reminder that behind the impressive ruins were vulnerable human bodies, susceptible to all the ailments that have plagued humanity throughout history. It's highly probable, and indeed the most accepted view now, that the decline of Mohenjo-Daro and the Indus Valley civilization wasn't due to a single dramatic event, but a complex interplay of several factors. It was likely a perfect storm of environmental change, resource depletion, possible internal social or political unrest, a weakening of trade networks, and perhaps opportunistic raids or disease. Imagine a slow spiral. The river shifts, reducing agricultural output. This leads to food shortages and social tension. Trade diminishes, further weakening the economy. The civic authorities, once so capable, find themselves unable to manage the cascading crises. People begin to leave, not all at once in a mass exodus, but gradually, family by family, seeking better prospects elsewhere, perhaps moving to smaller rural settlements or eastward towards the Ganges Plain, where new patterns of civilization were beginning to emerge. It's a bit like a failing company. It's rarely one single bad decision, but often a series of missteps, changing market conditions, and a slow erosion of what once made it strong, until one day the doors just quietly close. You try to picture the last inhabitants. Are they consciously aware that they are living through the end of an era? Or is it just a daily struggle, a slow dimming of the lights, where life becomes harder, less predictable, the old certainties fading away? Perhaps the elders tell stories of a golden age when the granaries were always full and the river flowed just right. Perhaps the young are restless, seeing no future in the crumbling city of their ancestors. There's a profound sadness in this image of gradual abandonment. The meticulously planned streets become quieter, dustier. Houses fall into disrepair, their once proud brickwork slowly succumbing to the elements. The Great Bath, once a center of ritual or communal life, might become a stagnant pool, its purpose forgotten or impossible to maintain. The complex web of social organization that made the city function begins to unravel. Who maintains the drains when the drain engineers have moved on, or their children see no future in the trade? Who ensures the quality of bricks when the kilns are cold? The very script of the Indus people, those enigmatic symbols on the soapstone seals, remains undeciphered to this day, as we've mentioned. This is a critical point. Imagine if Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform were still unreadable. How much less would we understand about those civilizations? The lack of readable texts from the Indus Valley means we have no native accounts of their history, their beliefs, their own explanations for why their world changed. We are left to interpret their story from the mute evidence of their material culture. It's like trying to understand a complex movie with the sound turned off, relying only on the visuals. You get the broad strokes, but the nuances, the motivations, the internal dialogue are lost. This decipherment is one of the holy grails of archaeology. Maybe one day a Harappan Rosetta Stone will be found, and these silent cities will finally speak to us in their own words, perhaps telling us exactly what happened. Until then, it's a fascinating, frustrating puzzle. You can almost hear the collective sigh of linguists and archaeologists every time a new seal is found, hoping this will be the one that unlocks the secret, only to be met with the same beautiful, impenetrable symbols. So, as you stand in the imagined streets of a fading Mohenjo-Daro, the vibrant city of Act 1 now tinged with this encroaching sense of decay, the theories swirl around you like dust devils. Was it the water, the weather, the wars, wastefulness, or widespread sickness? Or, most likely, a weary combination of all these woes, a slow, grinding attrition that ultimately proved too much for even this remarkably resilient civilization. The silence that follows isn't just an absence of people, it's an absence of answers, a testament to the profound and often mysterious ways in which civilizations, like all living things, rise, flourish, and eventually, inevitably decline. The energy that built this place, that maintained it for centuries, is dissipating, flowing out like water into sand. So you're left standing in the twilight of Mohenjo-Daro, Not with a smoking gun or a clear culprit, but with a handful of plausible suspects and a whole lot of circumstantial evidence. The grand, dramatic theories of sudden collapse, a cataclysmic flood, a decisive battle, a swift plague, they all feel a bit too loud for what the archaeological record seems to whisper. The real mystery of Mohenjo-Daro isn't just why it was abandoned, but how it managed to fade so quietly, like a slow exhale rather than a dying scream. You walk through these spectral streets, now further into the decline, and the overwhelming sense is one of emptiness, of gradual departure, not of violent catastrophe. Imagine the archaeologists of the early 20th century, like Sir John Marshall or R.D. Banerjee, first uncovering these incredibly well-planned ruins. They must have expected to find layers of ash, evidence of a final, desperate siege, something to neatly explain the end. Instead, they found a city that seemed to have just given up the ghost. The upper layers of excavation show a decline in civic standards, as we've touched upon. Houses are less carefully built, sometimes encroaching on those once grand public avenues. The sophisticated drainage system, that marvel of Bronze Age engineering, shows signs of disrepair, of being clogged and neglected. It's like watching a beautifully maintained garden slowly being reclaimed by weeds, not because of a sudden storm, but because the gardener simply walked away, or perhaps became too old and tired to keep up with the work. This quiet vanishing is perhaps the most unsettling part. If there had been a massive earthquake that leveled the city, or a conquering army that left devastation in its wake, it would be tragic, yes, but also understandable, an event with a clear cause and effect. But this slow fade, it speaks of a deeper, more systemic unraveling. It suggests a loss of will, a breakdown of the very social cohesion that made Mohenjo-Daro possible in the first place. You can almost picture the last few families huddled in the increasingly dilapidated buildings, looking out over streets that were once bustling but are now eerily silent, wondering if they should leave too. There's no dramatic final scene, no heroic last stand, just the quiet scraping of belongings being packed, the creak of a cart carrying a family away, and then the wind whistling through empty doorways. It's the archaeological equivalent of a ghost story, where the haunting isn't by a malevolent spirit, but by the profound absence of life. A mainstream historical fact that underscores this gradual decline is the emergence of what's known as the late Harappan, or post-urban phase. The Indus civilization didn't just vanish off the face of the earth in 2000 or 1900 BCE. Instead, its characteristic features, the large, planned cities, the standardized weights and measures, the distinctive seals and script, began to fade and transform. The population seems to have dispersed, moving into smaller, more rural settlements, particularly eastward towards the Gangetic Plain and southeast into Gujarat. It's less of a collapse and more of a deurbanization, a shift in settlement patterns. Think of it like a major corporation going bankrupt. The headquarters closes, but many of the employees find new jobs, perhaps in smaller companies, carrying some of their skills and knowledge with them. The brand is gone, but the people and some of their legacy continue. So Mohenjo-Daro itself might have emptied out, but its people didn't all die or disappear. They adapted, they moved, their culture evolved into new regional forms. It's a more nuanced picture than simple annihilation. This transformation leads to one of those fascinating scholarly debates. To what extent did the traditions and knowledge of the Indus Valley civilization survive and contribute to the later cultures of India? You see echoes perhaps in later Indian agricultural practices and certain artistic motifs, maybe even in some early philosophical concepts. But proving direct lineage is incredibly difficult without written records to bridge the gap. Some scholars see strong threads of continuity, arguing that the Indus legacy is woven deeply into the fabric of subsequent Indian civilization. Others are more cautious, emphasizing the disruptions and the emergence of new cultural syntheses. It's a complex tapestry, and tracing individual threads back through millennia is a painstaking process. Imagine trying to prove your great 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 grandparent invented a specific recipe just based on the fact that your family kind of makes something similar. It's tricky stuff. Now, for a slightly more unusual detail, consider the famous Indus seals. These small, intricately carved square objects, usually made of steatite, are found in abundance. They depict animals like bulls, especially the unicorn bull, a creature that has launched 1,000 speculative theories all on its own. Elephants, rhinos, and human like figures, alongside the still undeciphered script. What's peculiar is their very ubiquity and their sudden disappearance with the urban phase. Why were these seals so important for centuries? Used perhaps for trade or as personal identifiers, or for ritual purposes? Another debate. And then why did they, along with the script they bore, just fall out of use? It's as if an entire system of communication and administration simply vanished. Some have even whimsically suggested that maybe, just maybe, everyone collectively forgot how to read and write their own script, like a society deciding emails were too much hassle and just going back to smoke signals. Obviously, that's an oversimplification, but the abandonment of such a key cultural marker is profoundly odd and points to a deep societal shift. You try to imagine what it would be like to be an archaeologist sifting through the dust of Mohenjo-Daro. Each layer you carefully excavate is a page from a book written in a language you can't fully understand. A broken pot, a discarded bead, the foundation of a house. These are the fragmented sentences. You're a detective, piecing together clues, but many of the vital clues are missing, perhaps forever. There's a certain humility that comes with this work, an acceptance of the limits of our knowledge. We can map the streets, analyze the metallurgy, catalog the pottery, but we can't truly know the minds or the exact experiences of the people who lived here. We can't know their songs, their everyday worries, the specific prayers they uttered at the Great Bath. We project, we infer, we hypothesize, but a true deep understanding remains tantalizingly out of reach, like a word on the tip of your tongue. The rediscovery of Mohenjo-Daro and the entire Indus Valley civilization in the 1920s was a monumental event, effectively adding a whole new first chapter to the history of the Indian subcontinent, pushing its urban roots back by millennia. For a long time, ancient Indian history was thought to have begun much later, with the Vedic period. Finding these vast, sophisticated Bronze Age cities was like discovering that your grandparents, whom you thought were simple farmers, were actually pioneering rocket scientists in their youth. It completely reshaped the understanding of the past. And the work continues. New sites are still being found. New technologies like ground penetrating radar and DNA analysis are offering fresh insights. Perhaps one day, someone will find that crucial bilingual text, the Harappan equivalent of the Rosetta Stone, that finally cracks the Indus script. Imagine the excitement, the sudden flood of information as centuries of silence are broken. One can dream, right? Until then, scholars will keep squinting at those tiny symbols, hoping for a breakthrough, probably fueled by lots of strong tea. So, as the last vestiges of Mohenjo-Daro's life fade into the dust, what are we left with? We're left with a profound sense of wonder at what was achieved here. A city of striking order and sophistication, thriving for centuries in a challenging environment. We're left with the enduring mystery of its decline, a complex puzzle with many missing pieces. And we're left with a valuable lesson that civilizations, no matter how advanced or resilient, are not permanent. They are subject to the forces of nature, to internal pressures, and to the slow, inexorable tides of change. The silence of Mohenjo-Daro isn't an empty silence. It's filled with unanswered questions, with the echoes of a lost world, and with a quiet dignity. It reminds us that even in endings, there can be a strange kind of beauty, and that the quest to understand our shared past is a journey without a final destination. The dust settles not just on the ancient bricks, but on our speculations. The story of Mohenjo-Daro is a humbling reminder of the vastness of time and the fragility of human endeavors, even grand ones. The great river Indus continues to flow, a silent witness to the rise and fall of empires and to the enduring human spirit that built, inhabited, and eventually departed from this once magnificent city by its banks. The street you're on is now completely deserted. The moon, a silver sliver, casts long, melancholic shadows. The only sounds are the whisper of the wind and the distant cry of a jackal. It's time to let Mohenjo-Daro rest again, under its blanket of earth and time, its secrets kept safe until perhaps another generation with new tools or new insights comes to ask the same questions, hoping for a clearer answer from the silent mounds. Now, as the story of Mohenjo-Daro fades into the quiet recesses of history, let your own mind begin to drift. Feel the weight of your body sinking gently into your bed, a comfortable, reassuring pressure. Let each breath be a little slower, a little deeper than the last. Imagine the vastness of time stretching out behind us, filled with countless stories, countless lives, like the stars scattered across the night sky. Each one unique, each one part of a grand, unfolding cosmic tapestry. The mysteries of the past, like the mystery of Mohenjo-Daro, are not there to frustrate us, but perhaps to remind us of the richness and complexity of human experience, of the ebb and flow of civilizations like tides upon a distant shore. There's a peacefulness in accepting that some questions may remain unanswered, some silences may endure. Allow any lingering thoughts to soften, to become like distant clouds drifting lazily across a calm summer sky. Your focus narrows gently just to the sensation of your breathing, in and out, a soft, natural rhythm. The world outside, with its demands and its noises, fades further and further away. You are safe, you are comfortable, and you are drifting easily, effortlessly, towards a deep and restful sleep. The whispers of ancient cities are now just a gentle murmur, lulling you into tranquility. Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep into a world of hidden meanings, of quiet defiance and incredible resilience. Imagine you're walking through a bustling market in Cusco, Peru today. You see vibrant textiles, maybe a llama looking photogenic for the tourists, ancient stone walls seamlessly integrated into colonial architecture. It's a beautiful blend. But what if I told you that this blend isn't just aesthetic? but a living testament to a centuries-long game of cultural chess played by Inca nobles after their world was turned upside down? We're going to explore how these elite survivors of a fallen empire subtly wove their ancient traditions into the fabric of challenging colonial daily life. Honestly, the level of strategic subtlety they employed, all while navigating a new, often hostile reality. Let's just say if you think managing your work life balance and remembering your reusable grocery bags is tough, try upholding a suppressed cosmology while also appearing to be a loyal subject of a foreign king. You probably wouldn't have survived the sheer mental gymnastics. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, go ahead and share your location and local time in the comments. It's always a treat to see where in the world our historical explorations are reaching. Now turn down your lights, maybe get a fan going for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing not in the sun-drenched plazas of a triumphant Inca empire, but in its shadow. The year is somewhere in the mid to late 16th century. The air in the Andean highlands is thin and crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and perhaps the faint, unfamiliar aroma of European livestock. The initial shockwaves of the Spanish conquest have passed, that brutal, bewildering period of horses, steel, and disease that shattered Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire, the land of four quarters. What remains is a new, unsettling order. Cities like Cusco, once the navel of the Inca world, are now being reshaped. Spanish cathedrals rise, sometimes literally on the foundations of Inca temples. The old hierarchies have been violently dismantled, yet not entirely erased. You are, for the purpose of our journey, an observer, watching the descendants of Inca royalty, the curacas, local lords, the ñustas, princesses, the panacas, royal lineages, as they navigate this treacherous new landscape. Their world has been fractured. Their Sapa Inca, the divine emperor, is gone, either dead or a diminished figurehead. Their armies are defeated. Their gods, the powerful mountain Apus, Inti the sun god, Mama Killa the moon goddess, are now officially supplanted by a new singular god, enforced by stern-faced friars. It's a world of loss, of trauma, of profound disorientation. Imagine everything you knew about how society works, about your place in the universe, suddenly being declared wrong, heretical, or simply irrelevant. It's enough to make anyone's head spin, probably more than that. One time you tried to assemble flat pack furniture without looking at the instructions. Yet, as you observe these Inca nobles, you don't just see despair. You see something else flickering in their eyes, a shrewdness, a resilience, a deep-seated determination to endure. They are survivors, and survivors adapt. The Spanish, for all their military might, quickly realized they couldn't govern this vast, mountainous territory without intermediaries. They needed local leaders to manage labor tribute, the infamous mita system, collect taxes, and maintain some semblance of order in the countryside. And who better than the existing Inca nobility, those who already held sway over the local populations? So, a strange, uneasy alliance, or perhaps a parasitic relationship, began to form. Inca nobles were allowed to retain some of their lands, some of their titles, often Hispanicized, and a measure of local authority, provided they swore fealty to the Spanish crown and, crucially, converted to Christianity. This conversion Well, let's just say it was often more of a strategic maneuver than a heartfelt spiritual awakening, at least initially. You see them attending Mass, their faces solemn, perhaps even making conspicuous donations to the church. But then you catch a glimpse of something else, a sideways glance towards a sacred mountain peak during a Christian procession. The way a traditional Inca tunic, an unku, is worn beneath a Spanish-style cape, its intricate geometric patterns, tokapu, peeking out, patterns that once signified lineage, status, and perhaps even cosmological information. These aren't just fashion choices. They are subtle whispers of an identity that refuses to be extinguished. It's like wearing your favorite band t-shirt under your corporate work uniform. A small act of personal rebellion, only with stakes that are infinitely higher. A mainstream historical fact is that many Inca nobles actively engaged with the Spanish colonial system, learning Spanish, adopting European dress and customs when necessary, and even using the Spanish legal courts to defend their ancestral rights and privileges. Figures like Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala, an indigenous nobleman, famously wrote a nearly 1,200-page illustrated chronicle, the Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno, New Chronicle and Good Government, addressed to the King of Spain, detailing Inca history and condemning Spanish abuses. This wasn't just passive acceptance, it was active engagement, an attempt to navigate and even manipulate the new system from within. You follow one such nobleman. Let's call him Don Mateo Yupanqui. His Inca name perhaps a closely guarded secret now. His Spanish name a necessary concession. He walks through the streets of colonial Cusco. The architecture itself is a battleground of cultures. Massive, precisely cut Inca stone walls, known for their earthquake-resistant engineering, now serve as the foundations for Spanish colonial houses, with their whitewashed adobe walls and red-tiled roofs. Don Mateo himself is a picture of this uneasy synthesis. He might be wearing a Spanish ruff and doublet, but his posture, the way he carries himself, still hints at an older authority. And if you look closely at the silver ornaments he wears, or the patterns on a textile gifted to his wife, Doña Isabel Huaylas, you might see traditional Inca motifs: a condor, a puma, a serpent, symbols of the three realms of the Inca cosmos, subtly integrated into European-style designs. It's a visual code, legible to those who know, invisible to those who don't. The challenge for these nobles was immense. They had to maintain credibility with their own people who looked to them for leadership and the preservation of tradition, while simultaneously placating their Spanish overlords who were ever watchful for signs of rebellion or heresy. It was a delicate balancing act, performed on a tightrope stretched over a chasm of potential ruin. One misstep, one overt display of pagan ritual could lead to accusations, loss of status, confiscation of property, or worse. Historians still debate the true extent of spiritual conquest. While outwardly many indigenous people, including nobles, converted to Catholicism, how deep did this conversion initially go? Was it often a veneer, a pragmatic acceptance of the new dominant religion, while secretly maintaining older beliefs and practices in private or cleverly disguised forms? This concept of double mistaken identity, where both sides perhaps misread the extent of the other's true beliefs or intentions, is a fascinating area of study. You might see Don Mateo overseeing the agricultural work in his ancestral lands, lands he now technically holds through a grant from the Spanish crown. He speaks to the local campesinos, peasants in Quechua, the lingua franca of the Inca Empire. The rhythms of planting and harvesting, the reverence for Pachamama, Mother Earth, these are ancient traditions that persist, even if the surplus now goes to different masters and the prayers are officially directed to a different deity. Perhaps during a planting festival, ostensibly held in honor of a Christian saint, an offering of coca leaves or chicha, corn beer, is quietly made to the earth, a continuation of a pre Columbian ritual. It's these small, almost imperceptible acts woven into the fabric of daily life that kept the embers of Inca culture glowing. Then there's the fringe, or at least harder to substantiate, element of huacas, sacred places or objects. These could be mountains, springs, rocks, or even mummies of ancestors. The Spanish, in their zeal to eradicate idolatry, actively sought out and destroyed huacas. Yet many were hidden, their locations passed down through oral tradition. You can imagine Inca elders in hushed tones telling the younger generation that prominent rock on the hillside, the one that looks like a sleeping llama, that is a powerful huaca. The Spanish think it's just a rock. Let them. This secret geography of sacred sites, overlaid on the colonial landscape, would have been a powerful source of spiritual continuity and resistance. It's like having a secret map to all the best coffee shops that only the locals know about, except instead of caffeine, these spots offered a connection to the divine and ancestral power. The resilience is astonishing. These nobles are not just passively enduring, they are actively curating their heritage in the face of immense pressure. They are becoming masters of disguise, of syncretism, of saying one thing while meaning another. Their homes might feature European furniture and religious icons, but behind a locked door or in a secluded courtyard, older rituals might be performed. Textiles, those incredibly important cultural documents in Andean societies, become a key medium for this hidden language. A weaver might incorporate a tiny, almost invisible symbol for a mountain deity into the border of a tapestry destined for the local church, or a noblewoman's mantle, a alcala, might contain color combinations and patterns that subtly evoke her lineage and connection to the Inca past. It's a silent, visual conversation, a way of keeping memory alive when written words in their own language were suppressed or non existent for such matters. You see them in the marketplace. While Spanish currency is now the official medium of exchange, older systems of barter and reciprocity, the Inca principles of Aini, mutual help, and Minqua, communal labor, still subtly influence local interactions. The social fabric, though strained and rewoven with foreign threads, retains some of its original Andean warp and weft. The Alu, the traditional Andean kinship group, the fundamental unit of Inca society, while officially reorganized under Spanish administrative units like reducciones, resettlements, often maintained its internal cohesion and leadership structures, with the curaca playing a pivotal role. This persistence of social organization was crucial for cultural survival. The weight of this dual existence must have been immense. The constant vigilance, the fear of betrayal, the internal conflict of collaborating with a system that had destroyed so much of their world, all while trying to preserve its essence. It's a testament to the human spirit's capacity for adaptation and its deep need for cultural continuity. They are not just victims, they are agents, actively shaping their new reality, even if their choices are constrained. The story of the Inca nobles under colonial rule isn't just about loss, It's about the tenacity of culture, the ingenuity of the oppressed, and the subtle art of weaving the old into the new, ensuring that the past, however battered, would never be entirely erased. As dusk settles over the Andean city, casting long shadows from the imposing colonial stonework, you can almost feel the quiet hum of this hidden world, a world of memory and meaning, carefully tended in the hearts and homes of a conquered nobility. The thin Andean air grows colder as night deepens, but within the walls of Don Mateo Yupanqui's sprawling colonial style house, a different kind of atmosphere settles. It's one of carefully guarded traditions, a subtle dance between outward conformity and inner resilience. You're about to witness, or rather sense, the intricate methods these Inca nobles employed to keep their ancestral heritage alive, like tending a secret fire in a well guarded hearth. How did they manage this delicate art of cultural embroidery, stitching their past into the challenging fabric of colonial life? Let's start with the most pervasive and perhaps most cunning strategy: religious syncretism. The Spanish were adamant about eradicating idolatry. Churches were built, often directly atop sacred Inca sites. As we've noted, conversion was mandatory, but you can't just flip a switch on centuries, even millennia, of spiritual understanding. So you see a fascinating blending begin to occur. Is that statue of the Virgin Mary, placed in a niche that once might have held a representation of Pachamama, Mother Earth, purely a symbol of the new faith? Or does she, for many of the indigenous worshippers, now also embody the life giving, nurturing aspects of the ancient earth goddess? You can almost hear the whispered prayers that carry double meanings, a kind of spiritual two factor authentication, satisfying the friar listening at the door and the mountain Apu listening from its snowy peak. Festivals become a prime venue for this. A Catholic Saints' Day celebrated with vibrant processions and feasting might coincide with an older agricultural festival. The outward trappings are Christian: the banners, the chants, the images of saints. But the timing, the specific foods consumed, the dances performed, might carry echoes of pre Columbian rituals. You observe a procession winding its way through the cobbled streets. A statue of Santiago, St. James, the patron saint of Spain, often depicted as a warrior on horseback, is carried aloft. For the Spanish, he's a symbol of Christian triumph. But for some of the Indians in the crowd, perhaps he's subtly associated with Illapa, the Inca god of thunder and lightning, also a powerful, swift deity. It's not necessarily a conscious, cynical deception, but a way of making sense of the new by integrating it with the old. A way for familiar divine energies to find new channels. Scholars still debate the extent to which this syncretism was a conscious strategy of resistance versus a more organic, subconscious blending of belief systems. Was it active subversion or simply the natural human tendency to find common ground in different spiritual frameworks? It's likely a bit of both, varying from individual to individual, community to community. Then there are the textiles. Oh, the glorious Andean textiles. These were never just pieces of cloth to keep warm. In the Inca Empire, textiles were a language in themselves, conveying status, ethnicity, wealth, and even cosmic understanding through their intricate patterns, colors, and the quality of the weave. The Spanish, of course, introduced new materials, new fashions. But Inca noblewomen in particular became custodians of this ancient art. You watch Doña Isabel Huaylas, Don Mateo's wife. She might wear a Spanish-style silk dress for formal occasions, but in the privacy of her home or when overseeing her weavers, her focus is on the elecala, a woman's shoulder cloth, or the écussu, a wrapped dress. The patterns woven into these garments, the takapu designs we mentioned, are like little coded messages. A specific geometric shape might refer to her royal panasa lineage, another to a sacred mountain in her ancestral homeland. These weren't necessarily overt symbols of defiance that would get her into trouble with the Inquisition. That would be foolish. Instead, they were subtle, almost like a secret handshake in thread. A Spaniard might look at a beautifully woven mantle and simply see a pretty Indian blanket, but an Inca observer would read a deeper story in its threads. It's a bit like how today someone might wear a piece of jewelry with a symbol that has a deep personal meaning, completely invisible to the casual observer, but profoundly significant to the wearer. The skill of the weavers was paramount. They were the keepers of this visual lexicon, and the demand for these high-quality textiles continued, not just for indigenous use, but even among some Spaniards who appreciated their beauty and craftsmanship, perhaps blissfully unaware of the layers of meaning woven within. A mainstream historical fact is the incredible sophistication of Inca weaving. They used a vast array of techniques, producing textiles that ranged from the utilitarian to the gossamer fine kumbi cloth, reserved for royalty and religious ceremonies, woven from vicuña wool so soft it felt like silk. The Spanish themselves were often impressed by the quality, even as they sought to control its production and symbolism. You can imagine a Spanish official admiring a vibrant tapestry, completely oblivious to the fact that the stylized condor staring back at him is a potent symbol of the Hanan Pecha, the upper world, a quiet assertion of a cosmology they were trying to erase. Let's not forget the power of language and oral tradition. While Spanish became the language of administration and power, Quechua, the general tongue of the Incas, remained the vibrant language of daily life for most of the indigenous population. You hear it in the marketplaces, in the fields, in the homes of Inca nobles speaking with their kin and retainers. Within this language, stories were kept alive. Histories of the Panacas, genealogies tracing descent from illustrious Inca emperors, myths of creation, tales of powerful ancestors. These weren't written down in Quechua, though some nobles like Guaman Poma wrote about them in Spanish or used illustrations. Instead, they were memorized, recited, passed from generation to generation. Imagine sitting by a crackling fire in a high Ondian hut, the wind howling outside, as an elder recounts the deeds of past Incas, their voices rising and falling with the cadence of the story. This was how memory was kept alive, how identity was reinforced, right under the noses of the colonial authorities who often dismissed it as mere folklore. It's like an unwritten library, its volumes stored in the minds of the people. And what about those all-important kinship structures, the ALIS? These extended family groups, which formed the bedrock of Andean society, were incredibly resilient. The Spanish tried to reorganize indigenous populations into reducciones, planned settlements designed for easier administration and Christianization. But within these new structures, the old Ilu loyalties and hierarchies often persisted. The curaca, the local noble like our Don Mateo, played a crucial role here. He was the hinge, the intermediary. To the Spanish, he was responsible for delivering tribute and labor. To his own people, he was still the head of their Ailu, the one who represented their interests, who had a responsibility to protect them, who understood their ancestral claims to land and water. Maintaining these kinship ties, these traditional networks of reciprocity and obligation, was a vital form of social and cultural continuity. It was the social glue that held communities together, even as the larger imperial structure had shattered. Now, for a slightly more out there or perhaps just underappreciated detail, the strategic use of dreams and prophecies. In traditional Andean cosmology, dreams were often seen as powerful omens, messages from the spiritual world or the ancestors. You can imagine that in the aftermath of the conquest, a period of immense trauma and uncertainty, dreams and prophecies would have taken on even greater significance. Perhaps a curaca facing a difficult decision about how to respond to a new Spanish decree would consult a local diviner or reflect on his own dreams for guidance. While direct evidence of this is often elusive, as it falls into the realm of private belief, the persistence of divination practices suggests that these older ways of seeking knowledge and meaning didn't just vanish. It's a bit like checking your horoscope today. You might not base your entire life on it, but it's a little nod to older ways of finding patterns and meaning, isn't it? Historians sometimes find references in colonial documents to witchcraft or superstition that likely point to these continuing indigenous spiritual practices, often misunderstood or demonized by Spanish chroniclers. The Inca nobles also weren't afraid to engage with the Spanish system on its own terms, particularly its legal system. This is a fascinating aspect of their adaptation. You see them like Don Mateo hiring lawyers, preparing petitions, traveling to Lima or even to Spain to plead their cases before the royal audiencia or the king himself. They would use their noble lineage, sometimes producing elaborate, if occasionally creatively embellished, genealogies, to argue for their ancestral land rights, for exemptions from tribute, or for redress against abusive colonial officials. This wasn't just passive resistance, it was a proactive strategy of using the master's tools to protect their own interests and, by extension, the interests of their communities. They became quite adept at navigating the labyrinthine Spanish bureaucracy. You can almost picture a determined curaca in a stuffy Lima courtroom, armed with maps and documents, some perhaps of questionable authenticity, but impressively presented, arguing his case with a fluency in Spanish legal jargon that might surprise his opponents. They were learning the rules of the new game, and sometimes they even managed to win. This legal maneuvering often involved alliances. Inca noble families would intermarry, consolidating their land holdings and their influence. Some even formed strategic marriage alliances with Spaniards, a complex and sometimes controversial strategy, but one that could offer a measure of protection and access to power. The children of these unions, the mestizos, would occupy a new, often ambiguous space in colonial society, sometimes bridging both worlds, sometimes caught uncomfortably between them. The legacy of these alliances is still visible in the genealogies of many Andean families today. So, you see, it wasn't just one single trick up their embroidered sleeves. It was a multi-layered, sophisticated approach. It was the quiet prayer that blended old gods with new saints. It was the textile that whispered secrets in thread. It was the story told in the firelight, the kinship network that refused to break, the legal petition eloquently argued. Each act in itself might seem small, almost insignificant, but woven together, they created a powerful tapestry of cultural survival. It was exhausting, no doubt. The constant need for vigilance, the mental code switching between two worlds, the emotional toll of living a divided life. But it was through these subtle, persistent efforts that Inca nobles ensured their heritage wasn't just a relic of the past, but a living current that would continue to flow, shaping Andean identity for centuries to come, right down to that vibrant market in Cusco you might visit today. The echoes of their resilience are still there, if you know how and where to listen. As the colonial night wears on in our imagined Andean city, you begin to see the broader implications of these quiet acts of cultural preservation. It's like watching ripples spread out from a series of stones dropped very carefully into a still pond. The efforts of Don Mateo Yupanqui, Doña Isabel Huaylas, and countless other Inca nobles weren't just personal coping mechanisms. They had a profound, lasting impact on the evolving tapestry of colonial society and laid the groundwork for the survival of Andean culture into the modern era. What then is the true legacy of this subtle, woven resistance? You see, the Spanish didn't just conquer a land, they encountered a deeply rooted civilization, and that civilization, even in defeat, pushed back, not always with weapons, but with the tenacious power of identity. This constant, subtle assertion of Inca traditions actually helped shape the very nature of colonial life in the Andes. It wasn't a simple imposition of Spanish culture onto a blank slate. Instead, what emerged was a complex hybrid, an Andean Baroque, if you will, where indigenous elements were inextricably mixed with European forms. Think about the churches again. Yes, they were symbols of Spanish power and Catholic faith. But look closer at the carvings around the doorways or the paintings inside. Alongside the saints and angels, you might find depictions of local flora and fauna, or faces that look distinctly indigenous, or even geometric patterns that echo Inca Tocapu. It's as if the artists, many of whom were indigenous or mestizo, were quietly embedding their own worldview into the very stones and canvases of the new order. This wasn't necessarily a centrally planned resistance art movement, more like the natural expression of artisans working within and subtly subverting a dominant aesthetic. It makes you wonder what a modern art critic, transported back then, would make of it. Probably a very confused but intrigued dissertation. This blending extended beyond art and architecture. The way Catholicism took root in the Andes was unique. While the core tenets were, of course, maintained by the Church, the popular expression of faith often incorporated pre Columbian sensibilities. The reverence for specific mountains as APUs might morph into a devotion to a particular Marian apparition said to have occurred on that same peak. Pilgrimages to ancient sacred sites continued, now often reframed as journeys to Christian shrines. This syncretic faith, born from the necessity of survival and the human need to find meaning, became a powerful force in its own right, a distinctly Andean form of Christianity that persists to this day. It's a bit like your grandma's secret ingredient in the family recipe. It makes it unique, and everyone knows it's there, even if the original cookbook doesn't mention it. A mainstream historical fact is that the Spanish colonial administration, despite its efforts at control, was never entirely monolithic or all powerful, especially in the remote Andean highlands. They often relied heavily on local indigenous leaders, the Caracas, to maintain order, collect tribute, and mobilize labor. This reliance gave these nobles a degree of leverage, a space within which they could negotiate, protect their communities, and yes, subtly perpetuate their traditions. Their ability to operate in both worlds, to speak Spanish, understand European legal concepts, yet remain rooted in Andean kinship and cosmology, made them indispensable and in some ways powerful. The long term survival of Inca culture is perhaps the most significant legacy. If these nobles had simply assimilated completely, if they hadn't undertaken that painstaking work of cultural preservation, how much more would have been lost? The Quechua language, still spoken by millions in the Andes, owes its vitality in part to its continued use within these noble families and their communities. Traditional weaving techniques with their rich symbolism are still practiced, producing textiles that are not just beautiful handicrafts, but carriers of cultural memory. Agricultural practices adapted over millennia to the challenging Andean environment, including the use of terracing and the cultivation of native crops like quinoa and potatoes, were maintained. Think about it. The global popularity of quinoa today is a distant echo of this agricultural resilience. You can almost thank a long ago Inca noble for your trendy superfood salad. However, understanding this subtle resistance presents enormous challenges for historians. The historical record is overwhelmingly written from the Spanish perspective. Colonial documents, legal testimonies, reports from priests, administrative records are inherently biased. They often portray indigenous people as either compliant converts or rebellious heathens. Reading between the lines, deciphering the silences, and identifying the subtle acts of cultural negotiation requires immense care and critical analysis. It's like trying to reconstruct a whispered conversation from a room away, based only on a few overheard and possibly misinterpreted words. How do you measure the sincerity of a conversion? How do you distinguish between genuine adoption of Spanish customs and strategic performance? This leads to an ongoing scholarly debate. How much agency did indigenous nobles truly have? Were their actions primarily driven by a desire to preserve their own privileges within the colonial system, or by a genuine commitment to protecting their broader cultural heritage and their communities? The answer, as with most complex historical questions, is likely both. They were navigating an incredibly difficult situation, and their motivations were probably as complex and varied as human motivations always are. Some may have been more opportunistic, others more altruistic or fiercely dedicated to tradition. Attributing a single, simple motive to an entire class of people over centuries would be a disservice to their nuanced reality. Now, for a slightly stranger, more speculative detail that sometimes surfaces in discussions about hidden Inca traditions. The idea of secret societies or ongoing underground networks dedicated to preserving the deepest esoteric knowledge of the Inca Empire, perhaps awaiting a prophesied return or resurgence. While concrete proof for such organized clandestine groups throughout the entire colonial period is scarce and often veers into romanticized fiction, the very idea speaks to the powerful hold that the lost Inca world has on the imagination. It reflects a desire to believe that something more profound, more organized than just familial tradition was at play in keeping the flame alive. It's probably more like a secret handshake than a full blown Illuminati of the Andes. But the allure of hidden knowledge is strong. You realize as you stand in this imagined past that the story of Inca nobles is not just about the Andes. It's a universal story of how cultures survive under pressure, It's about the human capacity to adapt, to innovate, and to find meaning even in the most challenging circumstances. The weapons they used weren't swords and cannons, but memory, ritual, art, language, and an intimate understanding of their own ancestral landscapes. They understood that culture isn't just grand monuments and official histories, it's also in the stories told to children, the patterns woven into cloth, the way food is grown and shared, the names given to the mountains. The legacy of their subtle resistance is a vibrant, living Andean culture today. It's in the festivals where Christian saints and mountain deities still seem to share the stage. It's in the Quechua words that pepper local Spanish. It's in the communal spirit that still characterizes many Andean villages. It's in the pride with which people claim descent from those ancient panacas or display textiles made with ancestral techniques. The silence of the conquest was never total. If you listened closely then, as historians try to listen closely now, you could hear the whispers of an enduring world. As the first hints of dawn begin to lighten the sky over the Andes, casting the snow-capped peaks in a soft, ethereal glow, you reflect on the quiet strength you've witnessed. The challenges faced by those Inca nobles were immense, the path they walked fraught with peril. Yet they found ways to ensure that their world, while irrevocably changed, did not entirely vanish. They wove their past into their present, creating a future where the echoes of Tawantinsuyu can still be heard. Their story is a powerful reminder that empires may fall and conquerors may come and go, but the human spirit and the cultures it creates have a remarkable capacity to endure, often in the most unexpected and subtle of ways. The sun rises on a new day in the Andes, a land forever marked by both its Inca past and its colonial history, a testament to the enduring power of resilience. Now, as the story of these resourceful Inca nobles fades gently into the dawn of your understanding, allow your mind to follow that light, that sense of quiet persistence. Feel the gentle rhythm of your own breath, a steady, comforting presence. Let go of any tension you might be holding in your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. Imagine the intricate threads of history weaving together to form the vast tapestry of human experience. Each thread, each life, each quiet act of courage or creativity contributes to the richness of the pattern. The challenges of the past, the struggles for survival and identity, can remind us of the strength within ourselves, the resilience that is part of our shared human heritage. There is a deep peace in acknowledging these stories, in letting them settle into your mind like soft earth. Allow any remaining thoughts to drift away, like clouds moving slowly across the vast Andean sky, revealing the calm, clear space within. You are surrounded by quiet, by comfort, and by an invitation to rest deeply and completely. Good night.
Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep, not into the sands of the desert, but into something far more enticing, perhaps even a little crumbly. We're going to be unveiling the secret snack recipes of Egyptian pharaohs. Imagine, if you will, the sheer opulence. You're probably picturing gold and lapis lazuli, but I want you to picture the royal pantry, the ancient equivalent of that forbidden snack drawer you swear you'll only visit once tonight. Think less about grand pyramids for a moment, and more about the midnight munchies of a king or queen who literally commanded an empire. What did they reach for when they needed a little pick-me-up after a long day of, being a living god? It's a delicious thought, isn't it? Though, let's be honest, with some of the ingredients and preservation techniques back then, if you were suddenly transported to a pharaoh's snack table, you might politely ask for a glass of water and a quick exit. You probably wouldn't survive this, at least not without a modern stomach and a good travel-sized hand sanitizer. Seriously, some of those ancient brews could probably power a small chariot. So, before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel and lets me know you're out there, hopefully getting sleepy. Feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is for you in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where our little historical wanderings reach. Now, let's dim the lights, maybe get a fan going for some gentle white noise, and begin our journey for tonight. Act 1. You find yourself stepping out of the harsh, bright sunlight, not into a grand, echoing throne room lined with imposing statues, but into a surprisingly bustling, warm, and aromatic space. This, you realize, is the heart of the royal palace's food preparation complex, a sprawling area dedicated to satisfying the divine palate. The air is thick, almost heavy, but in an inviting way, rich with the intermingled scents of freshly baked bread, the sweetness of ripe fruits, a hint of roasting meats from a distant courtyard, and the faintest whisper of exotic spices you can't quite name. It's a far cry from the sterile, stainless steel kitchens you might imagine for modern royalty. This place feels alive, earthy, and profoundly ancient. The walls around you are made of sun-dried mud brick, plastered and perhaps once painted with simple motifs, though now they are mostly smoke-stained and worn smooth by centuries of use. Along these walls, rough-hewn wooden shelves are laden with an astonishing variety of clay jars, pots, and amphorae of all conceivable shapes and sizes. These aren't dusty museum pieces behind glass. These are working vessels, holding the very treasures we've come to investigate, the ingredients for a pharaoh's delight. Some are massive, requiring 2 people to lift, while others are small enough to cradle in one hand, likely containing precious spices or rare extracts. You can almost hear the faint hum of activity, the distant clatter of pottery, the murmur of voices, speaking a language that has long since faded from common use. Your eyes adjust to the dimmer light filtering in from high, narrow windows, shafts of dusty sunlight illuminating floating particles of flour and steam. The sheer scale of this operation is impressive. This isn't just a kitchen, it's a small city dedicated to food. You realize that feeding a pharaoh, their family, their court, and the vast retinue of priests, officials, and servants was a monumental daily undertaking. A mainstream historical fact is that bread and beer were the absolute staples of the ancient Egyptian diet, for rich and poor alike, forming the basis of their rationing system and even their wages. Workers on the Giza pyramids, for example, were paid in daily allotments of bread and beer. It was, quite literally, the fuel that built empires. As you venture further in, you pass an area dedicated to baking. The warmth intensifies here. Several large conical clay ovens, their tops open, radiate a fierce heat. Bakers, their bodies lean and muscular, their faces and arms dusted with a fine white powder of emmer wheat and barley flour, move with a practiced rhythm. You see them expertly kneading large mounds of dough on low wooden tables, their movements economical and strong. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of dough being worked is a constant, comforting beat in this ancient symphony of sustenance. They don't have stand mixers here. This is all done with sheer human effort. Some are shaping simple, round flatbreads, tossing them onto hot stones set around the edges of the ovens, while others are tending to more complex, leavened loaves, perhaps enriched with a little honey or a handful of dates, which will bake more slowly within the ovens themselves. You might notice dozens of different types of bread molds, pottery forms in various shapes, fish, human figures, simple rounds, indicating a surprising variety in bread presentation. It wasn't just about filling bellies. There was an artistry to it, even in these fundamental foodstuffs. And then there's the beer. Forget your modern light, fizzy lagers or hoppy IPAs. The beer here, known as Henket, was a different beast entirely. It was often thick, almost like a porridge or a thin gruel, cloudy and only mildly alcoholic. It was brewed from barley or emmer wheat, sometimes with dates or other flavorings added, and was considered a highly nutritious food source as much as a beverage. You see large vats where the brewing process is underway, the air around them carrying a slightly sweet, fermented aroma. It was likely safer to drink than untreated Nile water, which could be fraught with perils. An odd detail is that some Egyptologists believe certain beer brews were specifically made to be strained through specialized pottery sieves at the point of consumption to remove the coarse grains and leave a smoother liquid. It's a bit like having to assemble your drink, isn't it? Some assembly required should have been on the label. Historians still debate the exact range of alcoholic strengths and the precise brewing techniques for different types of Egyptian beer. While we have recipes and depictions of brewing, the nuances of fermentation, temperature control, and the specific strains of yeast available naturally are all subjects of ongoing research and sometimes spirited academic disagreement. Did they have craft breweries for the palace, producing higher quality or uniquely flavored beers for the pharaoh's table, distinct from the everyday brew of the masses? It seems likely, but the specifics remain tantalizingly elusive. Leaving the bakery and brewery section, you move into what seems like a dedicated pantry area for finer goods, the place for snacks, the little indulgences. The air here is cooler, and the shelves are perhaps a bit more organized. This is where you'd find the ingredients to satisfy a craving for something sweet or savory between the main meals. And for sweetness in ancient Egypt, before the arrival of sugarcane, honey was king. You see several large sealed amphorae, their clay stoppers secured with beeswax and perhaps impressed with a noble's seal. This isn't just any honey. This is likely high-quality stuff, golden and fragrant, painstakingly collected from wild desert hives or from carefully tended apiaries consisting of cylindrical clay hives stacked horizontally. The effort involved in collecting it, especially wild honey, would have made it a precious commodity. Imagine the bravery of those who climbed cliffs or smoked out bees to get this liquid gold. They probably deserved a medal, or at least an extra ration of figs. Beside the honey, you see baskets piled high with dates. These are not the small, somewhat dry dates you might find in a plastic container at the supermarket. These are plump, sticky, and glistening, ranging in color from deep amber to almost black. Some are fresh, soft, and incredibly sweet. Others are sun-dried to a chewy perfection, their sugars concentrated. Dates were incredibly versatile, eaten as is, pitted and stuffed, chopped and added to breads and cakes, or mashed into a thick, sweet paste that served as a binder and sweetener for many confections. You reach out and touch one. Its skin is thin and slightly wrinkled, yielding to the slightest pressure. You can almost taste that intense caramel-like sweetness. Figs, too, are abundant, piled high in wide, shallow willow baskets. Some are fresh, their purple or green skins taut, promising a burst of seedy, jammy goodness within. Others are dried, flattened, and perhaps strung together, a convenient and portable snack. These fruits were nature's candy, readily available and packed with energy. A perfect pick-me-up for a busy pharaoh. One of the more curious items you might encounter in this royal pantry, often found as offerings in tombs as well, is a collection of small, wrinkled, brownish tubers. These are Cyperus esculentus, commonly known as tiger nuts or earth almonds. They aren't nuts at all, but the edible tubers of a sedge plant that grew abundantly along the Nile. You see some soaking in a bowl of water, plumping up. Others might be laid out on a mat, drying in a warm spot. They have a unique flavor profile, slightly sweet, nutty, a little earthy, with a chewy texture. An interesting mainstream fact here is that tiger nuts are now recognized as a superfood due to their high fiber, iron, and magnesium content. The ancient Egyptians were clearly onto something good, thousands of years before health food stores became a trend. They could have started the first paleo diet fad. These tiger nuts could be eaten raw after soaking, roasted, or ground into a fine flour to be added to breads or cakes, lending a subtle sweetness and a pleasant textural element. Sometimes they were even pressed to produce a sweet, milky drink, a sort of ancient nut milk. An odd detail that has emerged from archaeological analysis of mummified remains is the presence of worn teeth in many ancient Egyptians, not just from grit in their bread. Sand from the grinding stones was a common, unwelcome ingredient, but also potentially from chewing on tough foods like dried tiger nuts or other fibrous plant materials. So, while nutritious, these snacks might have come with a dental cost. Scholars still debate the precise role and prevalence of certain wilder or less cultivated food sources in the elite Egyptian diet. While staples like wheat, barley, dates, and figs were clearly cultivated and formed the core, to what extent did pharaohs and their courts rely on or enjoy foraged items like tiger nuts, lotus seeds, and roots, or other wild plants? Were these everyday items, occasional delicacies, or famine foods elevated by royal preference? The lines are often blurred, and the archaeological record, while rich, doesn't always give us the full menu with all its daily variations. You continue to wander deeper into the storage complex, past stacks of more utilitarian pottery, towards an area that seems to be for more specialized items. Here, the clay pots and jars are often smaller, and some bear incised markings or small dockets of clay or wood attached by cord. These are hieratic script, the cursive form of hieroglyphs used for everyday record keeping. These labels might detail the contents: finest oasis figs, honey from the western apiary, spiced wine, year 5 of His Majesty, and sometimes the origin, the supplier, or the year of harvest. This was a surprisingly sophisticated inventory system for the time, crucial for managing the vast quantities of foodstuffs required by the palace. It wasn't quite a barcode scanner at the royal checkout, but it was certainly efficient for keeping track of the royal nibbles and ensuring that Pharaoh Akhenaten's favorite batch of sun-dried raisins from that one specific vineyard hadn't been accidentally diverted by a cheeky junior scribe with a sweet tooth. You can just picture a harried pantry steward, a bit like a stressed-out restaurant manager, with a papyrus checklist in hand, trying to make sure everything is accounted for and that the divine offerings are up to standard. The air cools slightly as you move towards a section evidently used for storing oils and fats. Large pottery jars, some partially buried in the cool earth floor to maintain a more stable temperature, would have held various types of oil. Olive oil was certainly known and used, though perhaps not as ubiquitously as in the Aegean world. More common might have been moringa oil, extracted from the seeds of the moringa tree, known for its stability and pleasant, mild flavor. Sesame oil and castor oil also had their uses, both culinary and medicinal. These oils weren't just for frying or cooking in the way we might think. They were used for flavoring dishes, for preserving foods, creating a seal against air, as a base for perfumes and ointments, and yes, for adding richness and moisture to baked goods. Imagine a small, dense cake, sweetened with date paste and honey, perhaps spiced with a hint of cinnamon or cardamom traded from distant lands, its texture made tender and satisfying by the addition of a little moringa oil, and then studded with those chopped tiger nuts, or perhaps some imported almonds. That sounds like a snack genuinely fit for a sun god, or at least a very important person with a highly discerning palate and a team of chefs dedicated to their every culinary whim. It's fascinating to think how these simple, natural ingredients were combined with care and skill to create flavors and textures that pleased the most powerful people on Earth thousands of years ago. So, we've explored the royal pantry, a treasure trove of raw ingredients, the building blocks of pharaonic gastronomy. But now, let's move from the potential to the actual, from the promise on the shelves to the finished products. What kind of actual snacks, lovingly prepared and artfully presented, would you find on a gleaming gilded platter, offered to a pharaoh as they reclined on their cushioned divan? Perhaps they're idly watching the sacred Nile flow languidly by through a grand portico, its waters shimmering under the Egyptian sun. Or maybe they're seeking a little comfort food after a particularly stressful session of decreeing laws, managing an empire, or, dealing with a plague of particularly opinionated frogs. It's not like they could just dial up their ancient Egyptian equivalent of Uber Eats and order a pizza. Or could they? Well, not pizza as we know it, with its melted mozzarella and tomato sauce, but the idea of specialized flatbreads adorned with various toppings, perhaps some chopped vegetables, a sprinkle of herbs, or a smear of seasoned fava bean paste, wasn't entirely out of the question. These could have been the distant ancestors of the Italian delight, a quick, customizable bite. Our best and most tangible guide to what these royal personages nibbled on comes rather poignantly from the grave. Archaeological evidence from tombs is invaluable here. The ancient Egyptians, as we know, held a profound belief in the afterlife and meticulously prepared for it. They believed that the deceased, especially a pharaoh, would need all the comforts of their earthly existence to successfully navigate the underworld and enjoy eternity. This crucially included sustenance. So, they were often buried with a veritable feast of actual food and drink, carefully preserved or represented by incredibly detailed models and painted depictions on the tomb walls. And the logic is pretty sound. If it was deemed good enough, essential enough, for an eternity of divine existence, it was probably pretty good for a Tuesday afternoon craving, back when they were still breathing our air. It's like packing your ultimate cosmic lunchbox. Within these silent tombs, alongside miniature boats to sail the celestial Nile and protective amulets, we've found an array of preserved foodstuffs. Loaves of bread, of course, in astonishing varieties, are common, but we also find evidence of roasted fowl. Ducks, geese, and pigeons were particular favorites, often cooked, then carefully deboned, preserved, sometimes even mummified themselves, and wrapped in linen to accompany their owner into the great beyond. A mainstream historical fact is the sheer quantity and variety of these food offerings found in wealthier tombs, indicating not just a symbolic gesture, but a genuine attempt to provide a full menu for the afterlife. Now, while a whole roasted goose, glistening with its own fat and stuffed with aromatic herbs, might constitute more of a main meal, smaller portions of these birds, or perhaps specially prepared, bite-sized morsels of poultry, could certainly have served as a hearty and satisfying snack. Imagine your pharaoh, perhaps feeling a bit peckish mid-afternoon, delicately picking at a tender piece of roasted quail. The quail, a small, flavorsome bird, would have been plucked, dressed, and perhaps marinated in a little oil, honey, and crushed coriander and cumin, spices readily available and beloved in Egyptian cuisine. Then it would be roasted over an open fire or in a clay oven until its skin was crisp and golden brown. The meat, succulent and subtly spiced, would be a delightful contrast of textures and tastes. An odd detail sometimes gleaned from analyses or depictions is the potential for highly individualized seasoning preferences. Just like today, someone might insist on no onions, perhaps a particular pharaoh had a known aversion to too much garlic or an insatiable desire for extra dill on their waterfowl. More cumin for the divine one, the head chef might exclaim. Historians still debate the frequency and context of meat consumption, especially finer poultry, as snacks for the elite. Were these choice morsels an everyday indulgence, readily available whenever the pharaonic stomach rumbled? Or were they reserved for slightly more formal, albeit still casual dining occasions, perhaps shared with a close confidant or a favored pet baboon? The line between a substantial snack and a light meal can be quite blurry, and the logistics of constantly having perfectly roasted quail on standby, even for a god king, would have been considerable. Then, of course, we enter the realm of cakes and sweetmeats, the true heartland of ancient snacking. And when we say cakes, you need to erase from your mind the image of light, fluffy, multi-layered sponge cakes, frosted with buttercream that you might pick up from a modern bakery. Ancient Egyptian cakes, or shiset, were generally much denser, richer, often unleavened or only slightly leavened by wild yeasts, and intensely flavored with the natural sweetness of honey, dates, and sometimes other fruits and spices. Think more along the lines of a very moist, heavy fruitcake, or a particularly decadent energy bar. One of the most popular types, reconstructed from tomb offerings and depicted in countless reliefs, seems to have been a relatively simple but undoubtedly delicious mixture of ground grain, most commonly emmer wheat or barley, the foundational cereals of their agriculture, rich date paste for sweetness and binding, and generous amounts of golden honey. This mixture would be kneaded together, perhaps with a little water or oil to achieve the right consistency, then shaped by hand into small individual cakes, lozenges, or even molded into special pottery forms. These forms could be quite whimsical, shaped like animals, human figures, or geometric patterns, adding an element of artistry to these everyday treats. Once shaped, they were often baked on hot stones, placed at the edge of a fire, in the embers themselves, or within those versatile clay ovens until they were firm and perhaps slightly caramelized on the outside. You can almost smell that incredible aroma of baking grains, honey, and dates, a scent that must have wafted through the palace corridors, a constant reminder of the good things life had to offer. You might find these fundamental honey date cakes further enhanced with other delightful additions. Those tiger nuts we discussed earlier, with their slightly chewy texture and nutty sweetness, were a common inclusion, chopped and mixed into the dough. If the pharaoh was feeling particularly extravagant, or if recent trade caravans had been favorable, these cakes might also be studded with chopped almonds or pistachios. These nuts weren't native to Egypt in large quantities and often had to be imported, making them luxury items. So, a cake generously filled with pistachios would have been a clear statement of wealth and access to exotic goods. It's the ancient equivalent of someone casually offering you a snack, sprinkled with saffron or white truffles. "Oh, this old thing. Just a few imported pistachios, darling." One particular recipe for a type of flat, almost biscuit-like cake has been tentatively reconstructed by Egyptologists based on analyses of residues found in ancient baking pottery and depictions of offerings. This confection seems to have involved barley flour, honey, and quite possibly some kind of fruit puree, perhaps fig or grape, to add moisture and another layer of flavor. These ingredients would be mixed into a relatively stiff dough, rolled or pressed flat, and then baked until crisp, perhaps on a greased griddle or a hot, flat stone. It sounds remarkably simple, yet the combination of the nutty, earthy barley, the intense sweetness of the honey, and the tang of the fruit puree would have created a very satisfying, chewy, and enduring snack. Honestly, it probably had more actual nutritional value and genuine flavor than many of our modern, highly processed health bars that taste vaguely of sweetened cardboard. The Egyptians knew a thing or two about natural goodness. Now, here's where things get even more intriguing and a little mysterious. A rather curious detail that emerges from some highly scientific analyses of food residues, particularly from those sweet confections, is the potential use of certain flower petals or aromatic plant parts. While not as overtly documented in texts or depictions as honey or dates, trace elements and botanical markers suggesting the inclusion of plants like chamomile, various types of lotus, whose seeds and roots were also known to be consumed, or even parts of the acacia tree have been found in some ancient cakes. Imagine a delicate honey cake, not just sweet, but also carrying a subtle, almost ethereal floral aroma or a slightly herby note. This adds a layer of sophisticated gastronomy to their snacking habits. Egyptologists and archaeobotanists continue to discuss and debate the exact preparation methods and the reasons behind the inclusion of these less common botanical ingredients in food. Was it purely for a unique flavor profile, a subtle aromatic enhancement that pleased the royal palate? Or did these specific plants carry ritualistic or symbolic significance, making their inclusion in food offered to a divine king particularly appropriate? Perhaps they were believed to possess certain medicinal properties. Chamomile, for instance, has long been associated with calming effects. Could these have been the first functional foods, designed not just to satiate hunger, but also to impart a specific benefit or mood? The evidence is often indirect, relying on microscopic analysis and educated guesswork, leaving a whisper of forgotten botanical knowledge and culinary secrets that we are only just beginning to rediscover. It makes you wonder what other secret ingredients a pharaoh's chef might have experimented with. A pinch of blue lotus for serenity, Your Majesty. Of course, no discussion of ancient Egyptian snacks would be complete without mentioning the abundance of fresh fruits they enjoyed. Beyond the ubiquitous dates and figs, their fertile lands along the Nile, irrigated by its life-giving waters, produced a wonderful variety. Grapes, both dark purple and lighter green varieties, were cultivated extensively, eaten fresh from the vine or sun-dried into sweet, chewy raisins that would have been a convenient and portable energy booster. Pomegranates, with their tough, leathery skin concealing hundreds of jewel-like ruby-red seeds bursting with tart sweet juice, were highly prized, both for their flavor and their symbolic associations with fertility and abundance. You can imagine a pharaoh patiently picking out the arils, each one a tiny explosion of flavor. Melons, too, watermelons, and perhaps other varieties similar to cantaloupes, would have offered a refreshing, hydrating treat, especially during the hot summer months. The sheer sweetness and juiciness of a ripe melon slice must have been pure bliss. These fruits would often have been served chilled, a remarkable feat in a hot climate before the invention of refrigeration. How did they manage this? One common method was to store them in porous clay jars. Water would be allowed to seep through the clay and evaporate from the outer surface, and this process of evaporation would cool the contents within the jar. It's a simple but effective principle of physics, cleverly harnessed. So, picture your pharaoh, perhaps relaxing in a shaded garden pavilion, fanned gently by servants wielding large ostrich feather fans. Another attendant approaches, bearing a magnificent golden or polished alabaster bowl piled high with glistening bunches of chilled grapes, segments of juicy melon, and the vibrant red of pomegranate arils. It's a scene of serene indulgence, a quiet moment of cool refreshment in a sun-drenched land. A mainstream fact is the critical role of such irrigated horticulture in providing a diverse and nutritious diet for the Egyptian population, at least for those with access. Did they ever have food fights with the grapes, you wonder? Probably not. Too much divine decorum involved, one supposes, when you're considered a living embodiment of Horus. Still, it's a fun image, a slightly less stuffy pharaoh, perhaps a young Tutankhamun, having a grape-throwing contest with his favorite courtiers. One can dream. And then there's the rather surprising matter of cheese. Yes, cheese. While ancient Egypt might not immediately spring to mind as a major cheese-producing civilization in the same way as parts of Europe, evidence strongly suggests that they made and consumed cheese. This was likely to have been fresh, soft cheeses, made from goats' or cow's milk, perhaps with sheep's milk also used. Think of something similar in texture and style to a modern fresh feta, a creamy ricotta, or perhaps a simple paneer-like pressed curd cheese. The discovery of pottery vessels with perforations, strongly resembling cheese strainers, and chemical analysis of residues found in ancient jars have confirmed the presence of dairy processing. Small, crumbly pieces of this fresh cheese, perhaps lightly salted, would have made for a delightful savory snack. To elevate it further, these cheese morsels might have been drizzled with a little golden honey, creating that wonderful sweet savory contrast that is still beloved today. Or they could have been served alongside a few plump dates or fresh figs, the sweetness of the fruit complementing the tangy, creamy cheese. An odd detail is that some tomb paintings appear to depict the process of cheese making, showing figures handling milk and what look like cheese molds, giving us visual clues to their techniques. Scholars still debate the scale and sophistication of the Egyptian dairy industry, particularly concerning cheese production. Was it a common household activity, or was there more centralized, perhaps even palace-controlled, production of finer cheeses for the elite? And what specific types or styles did they perfect beyond the simple, fresh varieties? It's quite something to think of a pharaoh enjoying what was essentially an ancient cheese plate, thousands of years before the French turned it into a high art form. Finally, we cannot overlook the crucial element of presentation. For the ancient Egyptians, and especially for the pharaoh, the aesthetic aspect of food was paramount. These snacks wouldn't just be haphazardly thrown onto a generic plate. Even for a casual nibble, beauty and artistry mattered. Food would have been served in beautifully painted ceramic bowls, often adorned with intricate geometric patterns, scenes of nature, or hieroglyphic inscriptions. Dishes made of polished alabaster, with its smooth, cool translucence, or even faience, that distinctive Egyptian glazed earthenware in vibrant blues and greens, would have been used to present these royal treats. The colors of the food itself, the textures, the careful arrangement on the serving vessel, it was all part of the holistic experience. You weren't just eating to satisfy hunger, you were partaking in an act that reflected your divine status, the bounty of the land you ruled, and the skill of the artisans and chefs who served you. Each snack was a miniature work of art, a feast for the eyes as well as the palate. It's a good reminder that food has always been about more than just fuel, it's culture, it's art, it's pleasure. So, we've journeyed through the bustling royal pantries, explored the raw ingredients, and even sampled, in our imaginations at least, some of the delectable finished snacks that might have graced a pharaoh's gilded platter. But these carefully crafted morsels, these sweet honey cakes, savory roasted quails, and refreshing chilled fruits, were so much more than just a way to tide over a divine ruler's hunger between the main, more formal meals. For the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, these snacks were deeply interwoven with concepts of ritual, expressions of status, and perhaps even what we might now recognize as a form of emotional eating or comfort food. After all, even a living god must have had days when only a perfectly ripe fig or a familiar honeyed treat would do. The very act of providing such a variety and quality of snacks for the pharaoh, ensuring their every culinary whim could be catered to, was in itself a powerful statement. It was a tangible reflection of the prosperity and stability of the kingdom. A well-stocked palace, capable of producing an endless array of delightful foods, symbolized the fertility of the lands under the pharaoh's control, the efficiency of his administration, and the skill of his people. A well-fed pharaoh, content and satisfied, was presumably a happier pharaoh. And a happy pharaoh, one would hope, made for a more benevolent and effective ruler. At least, that was probably the fervent hope whispered in the royal kitchens amongst the clatter of pots and the pounding of dough. Keep His Majesty pleased with the fig paste, and perhaps he won't decree another ridiculously oversized obelisk this week. One can almost hear a weary head baker mutter. The most profound illustration of the significance of these specific food items, including those we'd classify as snacks, comes from their prominent role in funerary practices. The ancient Egyptians, as we've touched upon, had an elaborate and deeply held belief system concerning the afterlife. A central tenet was that the Ka, an individual's life force or spiritual double, continued to exist after death and required sustenance, just as the living did. Therefore, tombs, especially those of pharaohs and high-ranking nobles, were equipped not just with treasures and tools, but with abundant food offerings. This is a mainstream historical fact. These weren't just token gestures. Often vast quantities of real preserved food items, from bread and beer to meat, poultry, fruits, and cakes, were carefully arranged to accompany the deceased on their journey into eternity. An odd detail in this context is the occasional discovery of mummified food. Just as human and animal bodies were preserved, so too were some food items, particularly prized cuts of meat or whole fowl, sometimes deboned, treated with natron, and wrapped in linen, intended to last for an eternity. It's a rather literal interpretation of food that keeps. Imagine an afterlife pantry stocked with jerky that's several millennia old. You'd certainly hope the divine digestion was up to the task. Scholars still debate the precise understanding the ancient Egyptians had regarding these food offerings. Was it believed that the ka literally consumed the physical substance of the food? Or was it the essence, the spiritual counterpart of the food, that was nourishing the deceased? Perhaps it was a combination, or maybe the act of offering itself was paramount, a demonstration of continued care and remembrance. Whatever the exact belief, the presence of these specific snacks, the honey cakes, the dates, the figs, in such a sacred context, underscores how central they were considered to an ideal, enjoyable existence, both in this life and, crucially, in the next. If you're packing for eternity, you only pack your absolute favorites, right? The specificity of some of these offerings also hints at personal preferences and a high degree of connoisseurship, even in what we might consider simple snacks. We touched on King Tutankhamun's tomb, for instance, which famously contained over 30 large jars of wine. These weren't just generic wine. Many were meticulously labeled with the vintage, the vineyard of origin, like House of Aton of the Western River, and even the name of the chief vintner. This is akin to a modern wine aficionado's meticulously curated cellar. While wine isn't strictly a snack in itself, this attention to detail and quality strongly suggests that similar discernment would have applied to preferred foods. It's easy to imagine that a particular pharaoh might have been known for their extreme fondness for a specific type of honey cake, perhaps one made with honey from a particular region known for its unique floral source, or figs grown only in a certain royal oasis. No, those are the common figs. His Majesty requires the figs from the sunken garden of Amun, the ones kissed by the morning dew. You can almost hear the exasperated royal taster explaining it to a new kitchen apprentice. This then leads to another fascinating area of scholarly discussion. To what extent were these delightful snacks an everyday, on-demand indulgence for a pharaoh, versus items that, despite their seeming simplicity, were reserved for specific, perhaps more ritualized moments or special occasions? While the pharaoh undoubtedly had access to the best of everything the kingdom could produce, daily life in the palace was still governed by routines, protocols, and religious observances. Were these sweet cakes, choice fruits, and savory morsels available 24/7, like a divine minibar constantly restocked by an army of servants? Or were they brought out at particular times of day, perhaps after specific religious duties were performed by the pharaoh, or to be shared when honoring important guests or family members? The line between casual, everyday consumption and more formal, ritualistic partaking can be quite blurry, especially when dealing with a figure who was simultaneously a head of state, a chief priest, and a living god. It's a bit like wondering if the Pope ever just kicks back with a bag of chips while watching TV. We might imagine it, but the reality of such lives is often more structured than we assume. Yet, amidst all the grandeur, the ritual, and the immense responsibility, it's also important to remember the human element. Imagine the pharaoh, perhaps Ramesses the Great, after a long day on the chariot reviewing his troops, or Hatshepsut, after deftly navigating complex political negotiations. In a quiet moment, away from the public gaze, a trusted servant approaches, bearing a small, familiar tray. On it, a few perfectly ripe, chilled figs, their skins glistening. A small honeyed cake, still faintly warm from the palace ovens. It sent a comforting aroma from childhood, and a goblet of cool water or light, refreshing beer. That moment of quiet indulgence, a small, simple comfort in a life that, despite its unparalleled power and wealth, was also undoubtedly heavy with expectation and isolation. It's a profoundly human moment, one that transcends the millennia and the golden trappings of royalty. These weren't just calories or status symbols at that point. They were little moments of personal pleasure, of normalcy, even for someone who was, by definition, anything but normal. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of curling up with your favorite snack after a tough day, a universal experience. And what of the creators of these delectable delights? The royal bakers, chefs, and confectioners must have worked under considerable pressure, their livelihoods, and perhaps even their lives, dependent on pleasing the divine palate. Yet, there must also have been immense pride in their craft, in their ability to transform simple, natural ingredients into dishes worthy of a god. They were artists in their own right, their medium being flour, honey, fruits, and spices. Perhaps there were celebrated chefs whose names were whispered with reverence within the palace walls, innovators who introduced a new way of spicing a cake or a novel presentation for fruit, earning them royal favor. Did you try Chef Tamos's new date and almond slivers today? Positively divine, my dear, one courtier might whisper to another. The legacy of these ancient Egyptian flavors and food preferences is not entirely lost to the sands of time. If you travel in modern Egypt, particularly in the Nile Valley, you can still find echoes of these ancient tastes. The cultivation of dates and figs remains a vital part of agriculture, and these fruits are consumed with the same relish. Honey is still a prized natural sweetener. Breads, though different in many ways, still form a cornerstone of the diet. While the exact recipes of a pharaoh's favorite snack cake might have vanished, the fundamental appreciation for these natural bounties, for simple, wholesome ingredients transformed into something delicious, persists. You can almost taste the continuity, a faint, sweet echo of a pharaoh's quiet satisfaction when you bite into a date-filled cookie from a Cairo bakery or enjoy a perfectly ripe mango on a hot summer day. It's a subtle reminder that while empires rise and fall, dynasties fade, and languages evolve, the simple, profound joy of a good snack, of something tasty that brings a moment of pleasure, is truly eternal. It connects us to these figures from the distant past in a very tangible and relatable way. They may have worn golden sandals and commanded nations, but they also knew the simple pleasure of a sweet treat. And so, as the echoes of ancient feasts and pharaonic whispers gently recede, as the taste of honeyed dates and spiced cakes fades from our imagined senses, allow yourself to drift even further into tranquility. The vibrant scenes of Egypt's golden age, the bustling kitchens, the serene garden pavilions, all begin to soften now, like a watercolor painting touched by a gentle mist, becoming less distinct, more dreamlike, as you prepare for your own quiet repose. Let your mind float away from the intricate details of history, away from the grandeur of pyramids and the weight of golden crowns. Settle into the peaceful stillness that is enveloping you, a comforting blanket of quiet. Feel any lingering tension you might be holding in your shoulders, your jaw, perhaps even in your temples. Just dissolve. Let it melt away with each slow, easy breath you take, each exhalation carrying with it any remaining thoughts or worries from your day, leaving you lighter and more at ease. Imagine the vast velvet expanse of the desert night sky, sprinkled with countless diamond-like stars, the very same stars that once gazed down upon those ancient palaces and the sleeping forms of kings and queens. There is a profound and ancient stillness in that immense darkness, a deep, resonant quiet that has absorbed the whispers of millennia. Allow that profound quiet to seep into your being, a calming, soothing balm for a mind that is now ready for rest. The gentle, rhythmic lapping of the distant Nile, the soft, sighing rustle of palm leaves in a barely there breeze. These are the only sounds now, and they are deeply, deeply lulling, guiding you effortlessly towards the shores of sleep. You are enveloped in safety, cocooned in comfort, and you are drifting easily and serenely towards a night of profound and restorative sleep. The tales and tastes of ancient Egypt have played their gentle part, offering a fascinating little journey for your mind before it settles into its own well-deserved quietude. There are no more demands on your attention, no more details to recall, only the soft, sweet invitation to let go completely. Surrender to the comforting softness of your bed, the quiet stillness of your room, and the peaceful promise of deep, uninterrupted slumber that awaits you now. Good night.